So, off the back of my review of Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 6, I thought I'd do another little addendum video for this episode. Now, I said in my review that this episode was pretty much the best of the worst so far. It wasn't by any means excellent, it wasn't a great episode, it was simply average. Maybe slightly above average compared to what we have had previously this season. Now, I'm doing this addendum straight off the back of watching the following episode, which is the Lower Decks crossover. I won't give any hint as to what I thought of the episode until my review actually comes out. Going back to episode 6. This episode was, like I said, okay. It still did suffer from a lot of new Star Trek traits and tropes, but all in all, it was a reasonably less flimsy episode than the ones that have come before. We do see a few little nods here and there. We see the 3D chessboard making a grand return to Star Trek. I don't think I'll ever be able to do 3D chess and operate on a 3D level with chess. That is just unreal. But we also see Kirk. Kirk comes back for yet another episode. He's probably been in this season a lot more than Pike at this point. Make no mistake, he is here to be, well, bitch slapped around. And he's here as kind of an emotional support animal for Uhura, who's going through all these nightmarish visions, of which they are pretty graphic. I wouldn't say that they are the worst things new Star Trek has done in terms of the graphic content. Star Trek has portrayed graphic content before, but not to this degree. It was always done quite tastefully with classic Star Trek, rather than this sort of level of gore. But I suppose moving on to modern times in terms of modern considerations when it comes to television shows and rating systems and the way that we've essentially moved on, and people have been a lot more desensitized to this level of graphic imagery. One example of that would be the crewman who is also having the nightmares and also experiencing this this sound akin to the Transformers. Come on, there are loads of unique sounds that you can generate, especially with today's technology. You choose something that's pretty close to Transformers, which I found quite funny, I suppose. He gets sucked out of an airlock anyway, and I apologise, a balloon, and he freezes in the depths of space. This is, again, nothing new that we haven't seen in modern times. Even older Star Trek, when people got blown out into space, they didn't really show an awful lot of it, probably because they didn't actually have technology to do so. It was actually quite graphic. As I said previously, we're just desensitized to it now. I did mention in my review this exchange between Una and Pelia. I felt that this was where the show reminds you of what it actually is and who it's actually written by. Despite, the general premise of the show being quite intelligent, this is one of two examples I'll take you through now. This exchange between Una and Pelia is like bickering children. Una is not behaving in a professional manner. She actually calls Pelia a hippie. Pelia is basically an untidy officer, and because she's lived so long, clearly Pelia doesn't give a crap. But Una is a professional, apparently. That's what we're led to believe, and she's berating an officer and basically talking down to her in a seemingly unprofessional manner. It really felt quite at home with what New Trek is, but it felt really out of place in this episode. That's an interesting, quite stark contrast with the rest of the episode, because there are elements of this episode that are actually written quite maturely and quite well. To have this scene in there really broke that up and separated it all for me. It pulled me out of the episode somewhat. The second point I'm going to make on this subject is the revelation of how Uhura sort of discovers that the ship is hurting these dilithium creatures or dilithium latching creatures. It is just the most simple, basic representation of what is happening. Even the way Uhura explains it, it's almost like so simple, and yet they have to explain it like they're talking down to you like you're a child. And I didn't appreciate that either. The solution to the problem was to decimate and destroy the lithium refinery, which is a huge, massive station with a massive undertaking. And according to Pike, I believe, he said it couldn't be shut down. I really seriously doubt that, because the whole place was sabotaged by the ensign who ended up in space. He was able to sabotage it and shut it down. They should be able to sabotage this station and shut it down. But no, on the word of an ensign who tells her captain she's sure it's the right thing to do, she orders the station destroyed by photon torpedoes. Pike just stands there being a complete and utter useless meme of himself. That to me was another element of New Trek that was very prevalent in this New Trek show, rather unsurprisingly. Now, I spoke about Kirk previously as being Uhura's emotional support bear and obviously punch bag, because she broke Kirk's nose because she was having an hallucination, and Kirk's answer was to pretty much hide the fact that she struck a superior officer and go get a dermal regenerator, which would fix a broken nose. It's not just a dermal regenerator, it's a bone regenerator. Those are not separate things. I feel that Kirk is being sort of pushed into this show. We wanted a show about Pike, and we're getting a show that has more Kirk in it than Pike, and I don't think that's the point. I don't think it was the point of the show. I think the show at this point doesn't really have any kind of direction, which for a prequel is a really, really bad situation to be in. Because if you are going to follow the limits of canon, and I will mention something about canon very shortly, then you have to guide your characters to their inevitable destination. On that note, as I said in my review, it is mentioned that Kirk, his dad, is still alive. He wasn't blown up on the Kelvin. Now, that means that this timeline is not the Kelvin timeline. Now, the whole Star Trek timelines thing has been further confused by the Prime timeline, which when I first heard about the Prime timeline, I believed that it was the Star Trek timeline, the normal Star Trek timeline, but we don't have that. What we have is the Prime timeline, which is a different timeline to the one that we all know, the canon that we all know from Star Trek when it was first released right up until the early 2000s. Now, that is essentially 3 different timelines, and the show has confirmed it's not part of the Kelvin timeline. However, it has been hinted and perhaps mildly confirmed that this show is the Prime timeline and therefore not canon to within the standard Star Trek timeline. It all gets very confusing. It's all really bizarre. I'm reviewing this show as a Star Trek show. It is Star Trek that I'm reviewing. Sometimes quite unbelievably, I'm reviewing Star Trek. It seems quite unbelievable to me that this even has Star Trek in the title. It seems to be quite a bad sort of imitation of Star Trek. Sure, it looks great. I think the Enterprise looks fantastic. In my opinion, the hull looks a little bit too much like someone's gone a little bit overboard with the hull effect on it. I always prefer my starships to have a bit of a cleaner finish than that. It just seems like the hull of this ship looks like a damn crossword. But other than that, the Enterprise shots and the Enterprise scenes look fantastic. I'm not going to argue the quality of the scenes that we see, but still, that's not enough to carry the show. Great special effects, graphics and updated visuals is not enough to carry a show that doesn't have a good story. This episode showed some promise, and it started to point in a new direction than what had come before with this season. But it's still not where it needs to be, in my opinion. It's not. It is still the same show. This episode just showed a little bit more promise than the others. Generally speaking, if this show continues this trend, then it should be able to self-write at least as much as it needs to stay on the air. But I don't think that this show is going to do that. I'm tending to lean towards this show not sticking with this minor improvement that it is made. And it is minor. I'm not in any way saying that Strange New Worlds is suddenly fantastic. It's really not. It was just a bit of a better structured episode. Now, there was one absolute belter, and no, I'm not talking about belter. I'm talking about the conversation in the shuttle between Una and Pelia. This is a different conversation than the one that was previously shown, where Pelia basically tells Una that she understands that the reason Una doesn't really like her too much is that she's not Hemmer. That's where the resentment is coming from. Again, Una is supposed to be a professional. Okay, she's a first officer. You know, what the hell? Who the hell is writing these characters to be this way? You know, I've heard that we're getting an Ortegas-centric episode, and that is not looking particularly good for me in terms of review, because I just hate the character of Ortegas, and thankfully she is massively underutilized in this episode, and I couldn't be happier about that. There was a somewhat mature conversation, and I say this being kind of coarse, between Chapel and Spock when they're playing 3D chess. It's quite a well-written scene, but it's, again, only operating on one level of intelligence. It's not really going any deeper than that. Anyway, those are just some of my thoughts on this episode. It was just not as bad as the rest. It was just a little bit above average, and it wasn't anything to scream home about. As regards to my green lighting review score, I suppose you could call it a score system, it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad episode, so you know it gets a green from me. But again, that little metric in itself is kind of flawed, because to get a green light, and it will not be happening again. I took pity on Strange New Worlds because it seems they got pretty close to a Star Trek episode in this one. So this is the only time I'll be giving it a green light, simply because it wasn't as bad as things that came before. But like I said in my review, I have to give credit where credit's due. They at least didn't suck that much in this episode. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts. If you like these videos, if you like these extra addendums that I do, please let me know in the comments and hit that like button, and consider subscribing to the channel. I will be looking at doing some more content for this channel, maybe getting a members area set up. I'm not entirely certain how that's going to go yet. Hopefully I'll be doing more videos in the coming weeks, as well as the Strange New Worlds reviews. I have also seen a little segment of Discovery, and well, after I managed to get past the trauma of seeing that, I thought I might do a video on that in a few days. Until the next video, you look after yourselves, you look after one another, and I will see you for my review of episode 7. Take care. Bye bye for now.